What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined as always by Paul Kilgallen, who has been on every Badlands podcast, it seems like, since we last recorded. Paul, how you doing? You excited to kick off this episode about your boy, Sam Darnold?
No, I'm really not, to be honest. This is going to be part QB docuseries and part therapy session for me. I think the preparation and the planning for this episode was the opposite of cathartic. Like it hurt to go back and compile all of it, and kind of like it's more recent than Sanchez and Gino, so I remember it more clearly. But it wasn't fun to go through it, and this one, when I retweet the preview link here, I'll have a funny GIF to go with it because this one sucks to do. I hate this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting episode. Obviously, if you haven't already, go back and listen to the first two, which we did on Mark Sanchez and Geno Smith as part of this quarterback docuseries. And Darnold, prior to the other two, when we were last talking about, I feel like my football education by the time we were set up to draft Darnold was on such a different level than it was when I was so excited that the Jets got a new quarterback with Geno Smith or with Mark Sanchez. And, I have so many vivid memories about being so excited and about Darnold being the specific guy that I wanted. When we get to the quarterback evaluation section of this, we'll dive in more. But obviously, we'll get to the end in a bit. But I think, what we want to accomplish with this is really taking a step back and looking at all the holistic things that went into the Sam Darnold era, which may seem fresh for Jets fans, but in doing our research, there was a lot of shit that just, I forgot or, kind of memory hold because of how bad it was. And so I think it's a good exercise for us to go back and really diagnose what went wrong. But we can't do that without giving proper context of the situation that Darnold was brought into. And so when we last left off this docuseries, we talked about the Geno Smith and the infamous Todd Bowles press conference where you're going to want a recorder for this, and the Fitzy season. And so, Paul, let's go all the way back to there, because I think there's kind of a gap between how Geno's career ended the 2015 season and how we got to the point where the team was ready to draft a quarterback at 3 overall.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. So there was that year in between, and that's where I was going to start. Like when I didn't set out to go further back, but when I started putting this together, I remembered Christian Hackenberg, and I remembered that we have to go back a little bit further. So starting back in 2015, again, we talked about it on the last episode, but the Jets caught lightning in a bottle with Fitzy after losing Geno to the punch. They win 10 games. They fall just short of the playoffs because of the Kenbrell Tompkins drop against the Bills, which Joe and Connor still talk about all the time. Crucial drop, terrible game. And so then rolling into the next season, and again, we talked about this last time, but they extended Fitzpatrick because they had to, right? And
I was going to say, you put in the notes, they extended Fitzy, and you put in parentheses smart. And I wrote, was it? Because they had to extend him. It may not have been the best business move, and they certainly didn't have the confidence in being yeah, we're going to roll with Geno. Extending Fitzy wasn't necessarily smart. He just had the franchise by the balls. It was
Correct.
A move they absolutely needed to do. I wouldn't have classified it as necessarily smart business, but they had to get that done.
Correct. They had absolutely zero choice. So that was a good note you made. Let me clarify. Here's what I meant by parentheses smart. So they extended Fitzy. They went and they drafted a replacement for Demario Davis in round 1. They took Darren Lee. That didn't work out, but we can skip past that. But then in concert with extending Fitzy, they drafted a developmental quarterback. Good move, right? Fitzy's not long-term. You know that he's been on 100 NFL teams already. He's not going to be there for long. So you do the right thing by both bringing your bridge for another year or two and taking a developmental quarterback who can learn under Fitzy. So the plan, I think, was a good plan. It's just that both players sucked. That was the problem. Kind of an important element.
The other thing I'll add too, but both players sucking. Obviously, Christian Hackenberg being the
Correct
bridge quarterback that we're talking about here didn't even see the field. The other issue is like it's a good plan if you don't plan to take the guy in the second round.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like if the plan is to draft a developmental quarterback, you have a list up here of all the quarterbacks who are taken after him. The plan could have worked, but it's resource allocation. It's using a round 1 pick on an off-ball linebacker and a round 2 pick on a developmental quarterback that at best was going to learn from Fitzpatrick and not see the field. And at worst was exactly who he was. Like, you're okay if, he's a dud 6th round pick. You're not okay if he's a dud 2.
Bingo. Good plan on paper, not executed well at all. Massive overreach at the spot he was drafted by McCagnon, which turned out to be kind of a pattern with McCagnon. He would identify a guy and he would just get locked in and take him no matter where we were drafting. He was projected to go between 2 and 4, and he was the 5th best quarterback in the draft according to the consensus, but most teams had him graded as a day 3 pick. And the Jets took him at pick 51 as the 4th quarterback off the board after Goff, Wentz, and Paxton Lynch. And just a couple of the QBs taken after him. Jacoby Brissett at 91, Dak Prescott at 135. Also, less notable, Connor Cook, who is great at Michigan State, Nate Sudfeld, Brandon Allen, Jeff Driscoll, Cardale Jones. Those are people who made NFL appearances. There's like 4 or 5 more who were just as bad as Hackenberg that got taken later. So that was a pretty tough quarterback draft, actually. And they just took the wrong guy. And he was so bad that despite the Jets starting 3 quarterbacks, he only cracked the game day roster 1 time in his entire tenure with the Jets. And it was only due to a decimated depth chart in week 17 in his second year. And so, and like, we're almost going too far. We talked about in a previous episode that like we would probably have to touch on these like smaller fringe guys like Petty and Hackenberg and these guys. And so we don't want to spend too much time here, but like the real reason we're bringing up the story at all is because that even after watching him for an entire year, sitting on the roster, never getting on the game day 52, the Jets chose in 2017 to pass on Mahomes at 10 and Watson at 12, with the stated reason being that they already had Christian Hackenberg on the roster, which sounded crazy at the time.
And to your point, if the entire plan was Fitzy and then Bridge Guy should never be like, you're hoping he turns into something, but Bridge Guy should never be the reason. Like, you're hoping, honestly, that he turns into like a good developmental backup at the most. And like, if you find a Dak Prescott diamond in the rough, that's incredible. But you will know that, like, if he is a guy who is not going to crack the game day roster in year 1, even as a backup, he is not going to magically turn into a guy who is going to resurrect your franchise and start multiple games. You were hoping to get a transitional player. Even with a bridge quarterback, your realistic expectation is like they could be a serviceable backup. There is no world in which it should have even if the plan was legitimate, like we're going to take this bridge, there's no world in which it should have prevented you from taking a look at the quarterbacks on the board. Not to mention, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought because of how ridiculous this is. But
we're not even at the painful part yet, and we're already going through it.
But yeah, it's just to not even do the evaluation on these guys prior to the draft. It set this for, like, I know that this is the reason we have to talk about Hackenberg, but like the Hackenberg pick at 52 was bad enough. The compounding mistake of saying that because we have this quarterback, we're not going to look at quarterbacks in the draft is like substantially worse in my mind. Like,
it's
not
criminally insane.
We fucked up is significantly worse than the draft pick prior to that. So they obviously skip on quarterback. We're not talking about Christian Hackenberg episode. This is Sam Darnold episode. had to get that off my chest, but continue
Yeah.
on with
Maccagnan was high as hell on the hopium, and he was so high that he took 2 safeties in round 1 and 2 in that draft instead of taking Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes. Interesting note about the 2017 draft while I was researching. The Jets have now had 6 first-round picks from the 2017 draft on the roster at some point. They are Solomon Thomas, 3, Corey Davis, 5, Jamal Adams, 6, Mike Williams, 7, Hassan Reddick, 13, and Jared Davis at 21. So just interesting little side note there. So moving on, after that blunder, they are not ready to give the team to Bryce Petty. They're not ready to give the team to Christian Hackenberg. So they go out and they sign Josh McCown, and they call it an open quarterback competition between 3 guys in camp. And it was a weird camp where it was like a long and twisted competition among 3 quarterbacks. There was no front runner at any time, and none of them were likely to be any good. And so I say that, and I'm going to hit on it again later. This is clipped from an article. There was some speculation Bryce Petty's outstanding performance Saturday against the Giants' backups might have vaulted him all the way to the top spot, but it was not to be. It seemed the Jets wanted to give Christian Hackenberg every opportunity to win the competition, with multiple long stints with the starters in the preseason, but Hackenberg did little to suggest he was ready for the job. The Jets now go into the season with one of the oldest starting quarterbacks in the NFL and one who has never managed to play a full 16-game season. It's likely at some point during the year, Petty and Hackenberg will be given a chance to start some games at quarterback. True for Petty, not true for Hackenberg. Never threw an NFL pass with any team. And it was sort of a feel-good season for Josh McCown, even though the team sucked. He had his best season ever, but Bryce Petty finished out after he broke his hand, and Hackenberg never got in, released after the season, and he had brief practice squad stints in 3 other places, but he never recorded an NFL stat. He never entered an NFL regular season game. This is a second-round pick that they made to play quarterback, and he never entered an NFL game. So,
yeah, and I think that sums up just how bad the Jets' resource allocation was prior to Sam Darnold. You know, we talked a lot in the Sanchez episode about what the Jets did to build up the team prior to getting the quarterback. And specifically, as you laid out through the draft, the Jets really did not build the plane before finding a pilot. You know, they sort of were trying to do 2 things in tandem. There was one other major storyline that I think doesn't necessarily get overblown by Jets fans, because I'm about to talk about 2 of the most revered Jets players in modern Jets history. But I do think, like, in the chaos that is the 2015, 2016, 2017 Jets, this storyline gets a little bit lost. And I think it's really crucial that we hit on it before we talk about the situation that Darnold went in. And that is, in 2016, my favorite Jet of all time, after, you know, the Kembrell Tompkins miss and the missed playoff, DeBrickashaw Ferguson decides to retire after, you know, a kind of an underrated player, I would say, from the national stage, beloved by Jets fans on it, obviously, but a true Iron Man, just consistency at the left tackle position that we have been searching for ever since. And right after that, so, you know, Brick's gone. He's replaced with Kelvin Beachum, or Ryan Clady initially, and then Kelvin Beachum. And in the Ryan Clady season, Nick Mangold gets hurt, missed most of the season, and is subsequently cut in the following offseason while on a roller coaster at Disney World. I don't know if you remember that day on Jets Twitter, but absolutely iconic photo from Mangold. Really good sport about it. But all of this leads to the starting offensive line for rookie quarterback being Kelvin Beachum at left tackle, James Carpenter at left guard, Spencer Long at center, right guard Brian Winters, and right tackle was Brandon Shell. So that was the protection, you know, comparing it, like, we're going to compare Sam to Sanchez for a multitude of reasons beyond their school, but comparing Sanchez's first line, which had Woody, Brick, Mangold, Faneca, and you know, I'm forgetting who played the other guard spot right now, but you compare those 4 guys
Brandon Moore.
Thank you. And Brandon Moore. Sorry, Brandon Moore. You were crucial part of that grab and pound offense. But you compare those 5 to the 5 that I just named, and you ask, and granted, the other thing that I'll add into this, we'll get into it in a little bit, and I don't want to jump the gun too far, but the Jets did not originally have the 3rd overall pick in this draft. They had the 6th overall pick, and a lot of the mocks were widely suggesting that the Jets take Quentin Nelson. And so it wasn't a secret that the Jets had a terrible offensive line. Like, people were arguing whether or not a top 6 pick was worth it for a guard. And the consensus was like, he's a good enough player and the Jets are in deep enough shit that it is. But obviously, after going through what we all went through, the mindset of the fan base had changed. And if it was possible that we could get a quarterback, people were hungry for it.
Yeah, man, that starting 5 sucks so bad. It made me mad reading that. So just before we get to the real draft evaluation of Sam, speaking of suck, this is the first that I can remember the fan base openly rooting for losses and a tank. I'm on record pretty hard as being anti-tank, while I logically understand the reasons for it and I get it. And I think in 2017, it actually made sense because there was a prize out there that everybody was shooting for. I thought that in the years that followed, it almost started to feel like at every sign of trouble, the Jets fan base just immediately went to, well, let's tank, right? We're not going to win the Super Bowl. Let's lose them all and try to get good draft picks. And as a fan, from my perspective, that's no fun. Like, I don't like doing that. So while I understand the logical reasons for it, and I think in certain situations it's warranted, I generally am against tanking overall. But the first mention on the internet of the phrase "suck for Sam" that I could find is from February 8th, 2017, which is almost 3 months before the Jets even drafted Jamal Adams. So we're a full 2 years out from drafting Sam Darnold. And I can remember during his freshman year at USC seeing a Jets fan in the stands wearing a pre-made customized Jets Darnold jersey and holding a poster saying "suck for Sam" also. And so
shout out Will Parkinson for doing that, by the way.
Yeah, that was definitely Will. 100% it was Will. And so that kind of began the era of Jets fans rooting for the tank, right? And so I'm going to take a clipping here from the great Manish Mehta, who wrote on February 8th, 2017, Jets fans have suffered enough through these dark ages, shed sufficient tears, and hurled a steady stream of 4-letter words at everyone in disgust. There's only one way out of the abyss now, one path that might give them a fighting chance against the evil empire, one person who might become their Luke Skywalker. It's time to suck for Sam. USC quarterback Sam Darnold might just be the next transformative quarterback to come into the league. There's 2 catches. He's not eligible for the NFL draft until 2018, and there's no guarantee that the Jets will be in any position to get him. The Jets are in full-fledged rebuilding mode coming off a 5-11 disaster of a season. The powers that be are fully aware that they have no quarterback, regardless of what they'll admit with a camera or recorder in front of their faces. Right? And so that's a full 2 years.
It is crazy. Obviously Manish is Manish, but it is like, that is the disclaimer that I'll put in front of this. It is crazy though that a Jets insider at the time had this article written, and I don't want to harp on this too much, but had this article written the draft before Mahomes. Mm-hmm. And everyone's like, yeah, we got to wait for Sam. But that is sort of what the evaluation was, especially after his freshman year at USC, was of the evaluation of Darnold.
Yeah. 100%. And so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, as we get into like the actual evaluation of him, we were talking a little bit before we started recording that freshman year was like, people were throwing around the word generational. This is the next big thing. This is the next guy. And by the time he made it to the draft, that stock had taken a little bit of a hit. And we got into a situation where there were like 5 quarterbacks going in that first round, 100%. They were all going to go. and nobody knew the order, right? You go back and look at the mock drafts and databases, and it's all over the place. There's no consistency at number one, and there's no consistency in the order. And looking back now, they weren't drafted in the correct order. So it's pretty interesting how, just that extra year in college kind of took a hit for him.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And like you said, as we dive into this, player evaluation of Darnold to see what it got right, what it got wrong, absolutely wild quarterback class. 5 for sure first rounders, like you mentioned, Baker, Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, and Lamar Jackson. And, listed them off in the order that they just got drafted there. But like you said, really no consensus on who the number one quarterback was going to be. And, you contrast that with Zach Wilson's draft class where it was like, okay, Trevor is one, and then we got to figure out the rest. Very, very interesting that this class, it was a incredibly, not necessarily a level playing field, but you could go to any different analyst and get any different opinion. So with that being said, we sort of aggregated just Darnold's scouting report off a couple different websites, and his main pre-draft player comps were Tony Romo and Phillip Rivers, which you heard a lot throughout his career too. I'm pretty sure Romo, even in the booth, has compared Sam to himself. His positives, Darnold's toughness and football IQ are what sells scouts on his ability and potential. Operated in an offense that asked him to make full field reads from the pocket and often from a snap under center. Has excellent field vision and a quick processor. His touch accuracy on short and intermediate routes stand out as a strength. He routinely shows good anticipation and puts the ball ahead of a receiver. Despite having a long release, Darnold can deliver the ball with velocity and can speed up his motion to get the ball in tight windows. He has the personality to thrive in any environment. Coaches praise his work ethic and leadership. Darnold isn't blazing fast, but he will lower his shoulder and run over the defenders. Negatives, he lets the ball get on top of his hand and drop his elbow to the waistline on throws. There are times on film when the long release allows defenders to jump his routes and create turnovers. This is the big one. Darnold turned the ball over 24 times in 2017, 13 interceptions, 11 fumbles, and has a history of flipping the field. At times, Darnold tries to do too much and forces passes into windows that aren't there. In the pocket, he could improve his feel for defenders and better use his athleticism to make plays. And so, I mean, looking at the evaluation overall, and I'll tell a little bit of personal experience too, but I have two vivid memories of that time. I was living in California working at NFL Network for the time. And like we said, all the quarterbacks were, you could listen to Mel Kiper at Josh Allen, number one. Daniel Jeremiah, who I was in production meetings at NFL Network with at the time, was like, if Darnold is there for the Jets, they better run up the card. He had Darnold as his top-ranked quarterback in the class. I know the Badlands guys were very hyped on Josh Rosen, which, you win some, you lose some. PFF was adamant that Baker was the best quarterback in the class and took a huge victory lap when the Browns ended up taking him number one. But, I remembered all Sam Darnold had been the guy for the longest amount of time of the people in the class. Obviously, Lamar was coming off a Heisman campaign, and the fact that he went fifth of those quarterbacks is still quite an insane evaluation. But I remember I went to the Texas USC game, Darnold's last year in college, and they ended up winning. I think it was an overtime or a late fourth quarter drive. But it was a highly competitive game, and Sam led his team down the field for a game-winning drive. And I remember turning to my friend, who was also a Jets fan at the time, being like, that is the stuff scouts are looking for. And come to find out, McCagnon was at that game. But I just was like, that drive is going to make an NFL team salivate. And I hope it's us. People were very hyped for Darnold. We mentioned this before, but the Jets were flirting with Kirk Cousins and potentially using that sixth pick, most likely on Quentin Nelson, who ended up going in that spot. Kirk used the Jets to drive up the price. and ended up going with the Vikings. And the Jets made a trade on St. Patrick's Day, I believe, to acquire the number 3 pick in addition to in exchange for the 6th pick, the 37th, and the 49th overall selections in that year's draft, and their second rounder in 2019. So the question that this whole section is supposed to lead to is, was the evaluation right? It's a loaded question because, as you mentioned, the quarterbacks did not get drafted in the correct order. Obviously, if this draft were done today, Josh Allen goes number 1. Lamar Jackson. You don't think so? You think Lamar goes 1?
No, I'm just fucking.
Okay,
around.
I saw for the audio only listeners, Paul gave me quite a face but I think
just a Josh Allen hater doing his thing here.
Listen, I know Lamar has 2 MVPs, but I think in most likely world, Josh Allen goes 1. Lamar, realistically goes 2 to the Giants, but let's say Dave Gettleman remains an idiot. We probably end up with Lamar Jackson as our quarterback instead of Sam Darnold. So in that aspect, in terms of picking the best guy who was available there, no, they should have gone with Josh or Lamar. However, the characteristics that they thought they were getting with Darnold, he has shown flashes. Saying someone has shown flashes this far into his career is not necessarily a good thing. And I think Purdy having the job over Darnold for the entirety of last year, I think is a really stark indication that maybe he did not live up to this evaluation. Because that is really, and he was not necessarily set up to win that job in San Francisco,
right,
after everything that team had gone through. But that's really one of the only times in his life, or his NFL life, he's been surrounded by the optimal talent. Because I don't think he ever got a fair shake with the Jets. And for all these, we've seen the turnovers thing is spot on. That may have should have maybe been a bigger red flag in his evaluation than we considered. I think you mentioned it, his stock sort of falling over his professional career or his college career should have maybe been a bigger red flag. But the long and short of it is, I can't necessarily come to a conclusion about whether the Jets evaluated the player the right way because of what they did to surround him. So Paul, why don't you take us through what went wrong with the Sam Darnold experience after taking him at the 3rd overall pick?
Before we get there, let me ask you a question. So let's say the first 5 picks are quarterbacks. Cleveland takes Josh Allen, let's say. The Giants take Lamar. Who are you taking? Knowing what you know now.
Knowing what I know now, I think I would probably take Baker.
Okay.
I know it's it's decisive, or it's divisive, I should say, between Jets fans. But I think just in terms of their NFL career, Baker has shown the ability to do more with less. And I think, obviously he brought the Browns, which surrounded him with way more talent than the Jets ever surrounded Sam. But he brought the Browns a traditionally, awful franchise to their first playoff berth and playoff win. I think the one thing, this is sticking out to me now, but obviously he had Sean McVay on his side. But Baker's ability to show up with the Rams 48 hours and win a game, I just think when you look at the totality of what they've done in their NFL career so far, I don't know how you take Darnold over Baker in a redraft.
Where was Baker right before he got traded to the Rams?
I know he was the Panthers. I understand that. And
he didn't do shit there either. I'll say this.
Sam. Neither did Sam.
Totally. No, totally. And I hate to be the guy that keeps making excuses for Sam, but I can't imagine a worse first 5 years of your career than to be with the Jets during that time period and then the Panthers during that time period. That's brutal. I will also say that pre-draft, I assumed Darnold was gone by the time we were picking. So I spent the weeks leading up to it hyping myself up for Baker Mayfield. And I was talking myself into like, I love the attitude. I love that he yells F you at people on the sideline like he's a psycho. I'm all about it. Right. And so when the board broke the way it did, Baker goes first. I'm like Mr. Krabs meme. I'm spinning, right? Like, because the guy that I had identified is now gone. And when they picked Darnold, I almost like